No intro, straight onto the guide. Farah's primary weapon, the BTEC TF2 Soldier rocket launcher, makes Pharah fire rockets that deal 120 damage on direct hits, moving at 35 meters per second, and at a fire rate of 1 round per 0.85 seconds. Firstly, the sightlines that Pharah plays are dependent upon the map and enemy composition. For instance, on Numbani first point attack, when playing up against longer range hit scans, pathing close side to where you have a short sightline onto their core will give you an advantage. However, up against a more flanker based composition, playing wider and longer lines of sight where you can't be as easily contested would give you more value. One of the most important aspects to maximize the value from your rockets is to maintain good corner discipline, as former OWL coach Hayes explains here.
When playing against heroes that have kill pressure on echo, such as hit scan DPS, use buildings and natural cover to your advantage. Peek and output damage, giving yourself a fallback option if the enemy draws their attention towards you. By doing this, your movement becomes more unpredictable, making you harder to hit. It is important to note that you should not do this against heroes with one-shot potential such as Widowmaker. Let's take a look at an example. Flutter uses the rooftops as cover to spam pre-fight. Notice that when he sees the enemy McCree looking at him, he dips behind cover to safety.
Notice how he's playing these angles here where it makes it so difficult for this McCree to kill on him. Because if the McCree peeks, he's peeking into the exact position where this Forest Farm is coming through. So this is going to be so difficult for the McCree to peek this. Just because of the way he's using this natural cover. Maybe he can get shot once, right? He can get shot once, but after that one shot, he's going to dip behind the cover, and then he's going to come back out when he's been healed by the Mercy.
Building off that last bit at the end, corner discipline doesn't prevent you from getting shot, but it does prevent you from being killed unless the enemy hero has a one-shot. Whilst on the topic of cover, doing rotations from cover to cover is vital in toning your aggression and having the ability to fall back, as Spilo explains here.
And the last thing is cover. Pharah is very, very aggressive, but it's always from cover to cover to cover to cover. A lot like Tracer, right? Cover to cover to cover to cover to cover. It significantly increases your longevity.
For instance, on Blitzworld's second point attack, there are many rotations that you can make that all have a piece of cover for you to duck behind if need be, and the distance between each piece of cover is not too long that you could get picked off mid-rotation. If you want to go an extra level deeper than this, do your rotations whilst your tanks are engaging, as your tanks will be baiting attention away from you. In terms of target priority, the biggest concept to grasp is to shoot what's easy. Too many Pharahs will be busy wasting time dueling the other Pharah, missing rockets with no splash damage, so unless your name is Yuzna, focus on wearing down tanks and ground supports, as even if you miss, you should land some splash damage. Lastly, with the broader usage of Pharah's rockets, since they are tied very closely to her overall playstyle, I'll go into more depth about spamming chokes and taking duels later on. Pharah's first ability, the Boosty Boy V2, makes Pharah propel her fastest over 11 meters in the air with a cooldown of 10 seconds. She also has her hover jets, giving her 20% movement speed buff, and can propel her 4 meters in the air every second. The most fundamental aspect when flying with Pharah is your fuel management, his chain going over 3 aspects to help you min-max every last ounce of fuel.
Does anybody actually know what the red part of the fuel indicator is used for? It's when you press shift. If I press shift, then my fuel will be full after my jump jet is done. So if I press shift when my fuel is at red, by the time I stop, my momentum burns off at the very top of my boost, I will have a full fuel gauge. Holding space, we don't go faster and faster and faster and faster as we hold up. We get to a maximum upwards velocity. So if you want to maximize the amount of fuel that you're getting, the other thing is that the upward velocity that I move at using jump jet has no relation to how fast or in what direction I was moving initially. So if I jump jet while boosting, I still get the same upwards, right? So the delta V, or the change in velocity, if I'm hover jetting while I'm boosting, is less than if I'm dropping and boost. Knowing this, what you want to be doing is right before you boost, go a little bit beneath the red, go right as you hit max down, you boost back up. So you get even more fuel out. This is important to micromanage this. So if I'm tap, 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 the majority of my flight time is spent with that cooldown between deactivating my hover jets and my fuel recharging. So you want really slow, methodical pulses so that you have less time spent in that cooldown phase and you can have better fuel management.
With wider uses encompassing tech behind flying with Pharah, his Concu showcasing rocket jumping on Pharah, and a workshop code that aids additional aspects of Pharah's kit.
You need to learn how to rocket jump properly on Pharah, or else you're going to be dueling this AI at a huge height disadvantage, which is not optimal at all. Remember, in the Pharah 1v1 in real matches, staying above your enemy Pharah mirror will always be advantageous. So to rocket jump correctly, you need to shoot at the ground, jump, and jump jet almost simultaneously and as fast as you can for maximal height. This workshop is actually such a great training mode to not only practice your initial rocket jump tech, but it will also refine your aerial movement, fuel management, and direct hits. It's the full package.
However, rocket jumping and using jump jets at the same time should only be relegated to initial rollouts from spawn, as doing this during the mid-fight reduces your available aggressive and defensive options, as Jane explains here.
Jump jet is an offensive and a defensive tool. One of the ways that you can avoid getting directed by a second one is to boost. Or if you do hit a direct on the enemy Pharah, you can use your jump jet to boost into the Pharah to land the second direct. So if you're fighting a Pharah and they're above you and you land a direct, you can use your jump jet to boost up into close range to land that second rocket. Especially if you're going against the hit scan ultimate. If you're ever going against a McCree and if he has high noon, if you press jump jet and he activates high noon, you actually can't drop out of the sky fast enough. So I like using the shift not as like a movement ability, other than maybe sustaining myself in the air when I'm running out of fuel, but I like using it either offensively or defensively to keep myself alive or secure an elimination. If there's a McCree there or something, instead of shelling him from range, if he doesn't see you coming, you can drop on the McCree just like you would a Barrage, 2-tap him from close range, and then use your shift to escape.
With the broader uses of Farah's jump and hover jets, there is a general rinse and repeat routine that you perform from high ground. Credit to Overwatch coach Lucid, who regularly goes over OWL and contenders analysis on Twitch. He cleverly describes this cycle as, quote-unquote, treating high ground as your helipad, with 4 main steps. The first is to boost or hover to high ground prior to when the fight begins. The second step is to regenerate these cooldowns partially. At this time, there should roughly be a couple of seconds before the team fight actually begins, and you can poke from high ground in the meantime. The third step is to drop or roam. Dropping refers to the vertical mobility of Pharah, which is used to quickly two-shot a squishy hero or to gain heals if you've taken damage at the second step. Roaming refers to the horizontal mobility of Pharah, which is to travel away from the high ground to gain another angle, or to quickly assassinate an enemy via your concussive blast. Do note that you want to have enough resources to return to some piece of high ground. This is important because the last step is to simply return to some high ground. He uses the example on Dorado's second point defense, where you can see all the steps pretty clearly. With the dropping and roaming aspects, an example of dropping would be on an arm in mid-rotation in open space, and an example of roaming would be using concussive blast to close the distance and duel a hit scan on the adjacent high grounds. Farah's second ability, Zophia's Concussion, makes Pharah launch a wrist rocket that knocks back enemies by 8 meters and is on a 9-second cooldown. With Concussive Blast, there are 2 overarching uses of it, which is for displacement or for self-mobility, as Spilo explains here.
There's obvious things like Concussive Blast needs to be used to disrupt, displace, can be used for self-mobility. In other words, I like Concussive Blast used a lot against static comps as displacement, but if the enemy composition is relatively flexible, movable, mobile, really conk should be used selfishly for movement, because you're not going to get anything out of displacing a Diva slightly, or a Genji slightly, or a Tracer slightly. No value there.
With the displacement aspect of Farah's Concussive Blast, there are many sub-uses to it. For instance, you can use it to peel for support. Here's an example on King's first point defense, where you can concuss any flankers on your backline supports. You can also boop enemies into your own team. Here's an example on Temple of Anubis point A defense, where my team's Pharah boops back the enemy Brawl in an attempt to kill the enemy backline. Other boops would be environmental kills for obvious reasons. Lastly, you can prevent enemy cooldowns and ultimates, as well as enabling your own cooldowns and ultimates. This can be denying enemy res, or denying follow-up from Reinhardt Shatter, or enabling your Diva Bomb or Wrecking Ball mines respectively. With concussions associated with self-mobility, you can use concussions to escape a duel. This ties into my last section about using concussion after you drop or roam. However, the main use of concussion is to enable duels in the first place, as Coach Hayes gives a visual example of Yuzna doing so here.
So that was a really nice maneuver. He repositioned himself closer to the Ashe, again where he's going to have a favorable duel versus this Ashe. If he stays at range from here and tries to shoot the Ashe, this is not going to work out for him. Obviously he has a projectile. He's playing to engage close to the Ashe here and take a close 2v2 where he's going to have a favored fight.
Again, since this heavily ties into the broader playstyle of Pharah, more on this will be featured later on. Pharah's ultimate, World War III, makes Pharah release a barrage of mini rockets that can deal up to 3000 damage in 2.5 seconds, with the rockets moving at 45 meters per second. In terms of tech, here's Jane going over the audio cues associated with barrage, alongside the rocket cancel and concussion into jump jet move.
You go up because descending has no noise, and barrage will stop vertical and like all momentum instantly the moment you press your barrage. So that's how you surprise people from high too low. And you also want to be doing it like through doorways into places where people can't dodge. You can animation cancel rocket with barrage. Drop. Did you see? My ammo's at 5. I used an extra rocket. Floor concussion into boost onto barraging the high ground. So the tech from barraging from high to low or through doorways or areas is boost up, drop silently, so you surprise people. The other way that you surprise people on Pharah, you're seeing a theme here. You look at the ground, you boost up, boom. Right? So you get a ton of horizontal momentum from the concussion blast. You combo that into the jump jet so that you're getting just a crazy amount of vertical and horizontal momentum at the same time. You just appear out of nowhere and they get barraged and they die immediately because you pulled the trigger, and the barrage stops you.
An example of that latter tech could be on King's Sword third point attack, where you clear and eliminate any DPS on the high ground before they can even react. Make sure you time this just after your tanks engage so that all attention from the enemy team is onto your tanks, allowing you to surprise the enemy team. With timing your barrages, here's Spilo going over when you just time your barrages.
Barrage is great mid-fight. Deval fights, fewer cooldowns. It's a lot like Death Blossom. It has the opportunity to kill 6, or has the opportunity to kill you instantly. So it has to be set up, has to be supported, it has to be communicated, it has to be timed well. It's not just an initiation ultimate.
Likewise to High Noon and Death Blossom, Barrage thrives when the enemy team don't have many cooldowns or stuns to stop your ultimate, which is typically in the mid-fight. Lastly, a very niche use of Barrage is to win duels with it on flanks. For instance, on Route 66 third point attack, you can concuss into Barrage when dueling a hit scan who wants to use the high ground. Since heroes like McCree can stun you, I only recommend doing this with a Zarya bubble and or a Mercy Pockets. Moving on to the positional, playstyle and compositional section of the guides. In terms of general positioning, there are 4 guidelines which I'll showcase on Hanamura first point defense. The first is to have cover, which I've already mentioned. The second guideline is to have LOS onto the enemy team. This just provides you with multiple angles to spam from. The third guideline is to have good distance from angles so that an enemy flanker can't sneak up on you. The fourth guideline is to have aggressive and defensive rotation options. This can allow you to go in aggressive for an assassination via a concussive blast or to retreat away. Also making reference to Luted's helipad concept, the high ground closest to second point as well as the high ground that acts as a rim around first point alongside the high ground co-side can all be your helipads. With the overall playstyle of Pharah, it boils down to either spamming chokes or taking duels, as Spilo explains here.
Pharah, it's all about knowing when you want to be spamming a choke or spamming an area that's really nasty from an angle, or when you're going to go pursuing duels. This is specifically pharmacy. If there's a really nasty choke that I can be punishing and tanks that I can be abusing and squishies, things like that, great. But as soon as there's no longer a really strong choke or there's not a lot of people in the choke, you need to actively be pursuing duels. Pharmacy can kill anything in the game. Just about. One direct rocket damage boosted, you one-shot a tracer. The problem I see is way too many Pharah players just resort to spamming a choke and they're not changing what they're shooting at all. Tracer just flanked your backline, spam choke. There's a Zenyatta on an angle, spam choke. Spam shield. You're a very mobile hero, especially considering the speed changes with her, the conk changes with her. You have so much more flexibility with what and where you can be. Like I said, just look at Yazin, look at how he plays Pharah. Not just a spam hero, he's actually playing a duelist / flanker style. That's how Pharah has to be played, especially if you're looking to play a lot of Pharah against compositions that may or may not be very intuitive to play into.
Applying this to Brawl, if you're keen in playing Pharah with Lucio Bap or Lucio Moira, your input will have to be very surgical and akin to the flanker or duelist playstyle. For instance, on Legion Control Center, you could take a flanker type angle and boost the high ground after firing a few shots in close range. Against Brawl, without a Lucio Bap or Lucio Moira, spamming chokes from angles is likely the best play. For instance, on Hanamura first point attack, spamming from the window onto the core whilst your core pushes in will force the enemy team to back up, allowing your team to more easily get through the choke. In poke, playing for duels is likely your move. For instance, on Blitzworld first point attack, you could concuss yourself over the hay rooftop and assassinate the enemy hit scan. However, when playing a harder spam composition, such as Zenbap, up against a dive composition, spamming the enemy team's core with the aid of Heal Orb to prevent their dive is vital, as Spilo explains here.
If you Harmony Orb your Echo, and she just permanently hunts down that monkey, or hunts down that Tracer, you're gonna make it so much harder for them to dive. Like, you Harmony Orb your Echo or your Hanzo, or your Tracer, and she just literally just like goes after them and just constantly pressures them, they never really dive, or they never dive properly, and they certainly never dive at full HP. You force her Matrix, maybe you force a Monkey Bubble, maybe the Monkey's 300 HP, maybe the Ball has to use this adaptive shields before he even goes in. The Tracer uses all her blings just to be able to reach the dive. Like, it feels really messy. That's why for a long time, when you did see Bap Zen, you almost always saw it with a Tracer.
In dive, you want to have an angle and a sightline onto your team's Killbox. For instance, on Gibraltar first point attack, you could path co-side where you have an angle and a sightline onto your dive. Note that you can play more aggressively if your team is looking to land a kill, which is more common with the Lucio Moira dive, or play more passively if your team is looking to build ult charge, most common with more spammy dives. Lastly, since poke compositions normally feature a Mercy, tell your Mercy to tell you when they stop pocketing you. If you can't, then try your best to keep track. This is to help tone your aggression, as you may want to not do a certain play without a pocket and vice versa. Well, that's the guide. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe, and if this video helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time. Alright, I'm adding this in a few hours before the guide goes live, but it just got announced that Spilo made it to the Overwatch League as Spitfire's assistant coach. Spilo, if you're watching this, I just wanted to give you a massive thanks for aiding my guides, and also giving me the opportunities to collaborate with you. I'm forever in debt to your generosity, and I wish you all the luck on the Spitfire, because you deserve it. And with that out of the way, until next time.